I've always believed that when you pay for a home, you're not just buying walls and a roof. You're buying peace. You're buying your own little slice of freedom, of calm after a long workday, of quiet Sunday mornings with coffee on the porch and the sound of birds instead of sirens. That was what I was chasing when I bought the house. A craftsman-style home in a tree-lined suburb just outside of Charleston, South Carolina. Great schools, low crime, and the kind of neighbors who smile and wave but didn't pry. Or at least that's what I thought I was getting. The first 3 months were bliss. My wife, Jamie, and I would sit out on the wraparound porch every evening with our golden retriever, Ranger, watching the sun dip behind the magnolia trees. We'd wave at joggers, sip iced tea, and talk about the future, kids, renovations, maybe even a new truck for me once the budget opened up. The neighborhood had one of those white picket fence vibes you see in Hallmark movies. And while we were aware it was an HOA-managed community, we weren't worried. At closing, the documents mention a few rules about lawn maintenance, exterior paint, and mailbox conformity, but nothing out of the ordinary. We signed, we moved in, and we didn't give a second thought until the mailbox letter arrived. It was a Tuesday in late May when I first saw the envelope. A standard white envelope with a generic printed label that read Crescent Glen Homeowners Association. I opened it thinking it might be a newsletter or maybe a reminder about the upcoming summer barbecue they'd been promoting. Instead, I found a warning. Not a friendly reminder, not a notice, an official violation. Your mailbox does not conform to HOA guidelines. Please replace it with an approved model within 14 days or face fines. It seemed ridiculous. I had replaced the old mailbox with a new one from Lowe's the week after we moved in. The original one was rusted and leaning, completely unusable. I'd gone out, bought a solid black cast iron box with a decorative bronze flag and house number placard. It looked sharp, clean, classic, and sturdy. But apparently it wasn't approved. I flipped the letter over expecting maybe a picture or a list of acceptable models. But there was nothing, just a vague citation and a veiled threat of legal action for noncompliance. I called the number listed on the bottom of the letter. It rang 3 times before a clipped voice answered. Crescent Glen HOA. This is Marlene. I explained the situation, expecting some sort of common sense to kick in, maybe a compromise, maybe a simple explanation that the guidelines had changed and here's what's now approved. Instead, Marlene replied with something that would become the opening shot of what turned into a full-blown war. You didn't seek pre-approval. That mailbox is unauthorized. The board has already decided. If you don't comply, fines will accrue daily until legal action is taken. I paused, confused. Legal action? Over mailbox. She didn't flinch. Yes, sir. We have strict architectural standards. You agreed to them when you bought the property. Click. She hung up before I could say another word. I remember standing there in the kitchen, phone still in hand, staring out the window at the mailbox like it was mocking me. I walked outside, crossed the driveway, and inspected it again. It was straight. It was secure. It looked, objectively, better than half the other boxes on the street, some of which were clearly dented, faded, or leaning like the Tower of Pisa. But none of them had received warning letters. Just me. That night, Jamie and I scrolled through the HOA's online portal. Buried 3 clicks deep under a section titled Exterior Modifications was a PDF approved mailbox designs. It showed a single model, a white composite box with a green plastic flag. It looked like it belonged in front of a middle school from 1995. No stylistic options. No room for variation. Just that single, ugly box. Jamie leaned over and whispered, "This is ridiculous. Ours looks way better." I agreed, but what started as irritation quickly morphed into something else. I began to realize this wasn't about a mailbox. This was about control. The next morning, a second letter arrived. This time it carried a fine, $25 per day for noncompliance, effective immediately. The letter also warned that after 30 days, the matter would be turned over to the HOA's legal counsel. I laughed. Then I got angry. That same week, I started getting side eyes from the HOA president, a woman named Linda Morse who lived 4 houses down. Late 50s, permanently pursed lips, always wearing a lavender windbreaker and white sneakers, like she was headed to supervise a pickleball tournament. I'd seen her before, mostly at HOA events. She'd introduce herself with a fake smile and that old-school Southern charm that hides a sharp edge. Now, she barely looked at me, just nodded tightly if we passed. One morning, as I was pulling weeds near the driveway, she actually stopped in front of the mailbox, hands on her hips, shook her head slowly, and walked off. No words, just silent judgment. I started doing something petty. Every morning, I'd polish the mailbox. I kid you not. Wipe it down. Buff it. Make it gleam like a Rolls-Royce hood ornament. And every time I saw Linda's, I twitch at it. I smiled a little more. But things didn't stay funny for long. At day 14, a letter from the HOA's law firm arrived. A local office that specialized in residential enforcement. The letter was written in stiff legalese, citing my repeated failure to comply with Crescent Glen community covenants, and informing me that unless I paid the outstanding balance of $350 in fines and replaced the mailbox with the approved model, they would initiate a lawsuit to enforce compliance. I couldn't believe it. Jamie wanted me to just replace the mailbox and be done with it. She was worried it would hurt our standing in the neighborhood. Or worse, our credit if it escalated. But I wasn't wired that way. I'm the son of a machinist and a schoolteacher. I don't respond well to threats, especially not petty ones designed to flex authority. So I sent a letter back. I respectfully disagree with your determination and will not be replacing my mailbox. I have reviewed the CC and RS and find no enforceable language prohibiting tasteful, professionally installed replacements. I consider this matter closed. 2 days later, I was served court papers. The HOA was suing me for $500 in damages, plus legal fees, plus continued fines, over a mailbox that cost $187.99 at Lowe's. Jamie was furious, not at me, but at the absurdity. This isn't even about rules anymore. It's about making an example. And that's when I decided if they wanted to fight, they were going to get one. What they didn't know, what Linda Morse didn't know, what Marlene from the HOA office didn't know, what even Jamie barely understood, was that I had resources. I wasn't just some suburban dad with a nice lawn. I was a former contract negotiator for a Fortune 500 company. I had legal contacts, time, and a taste for stubborn revenge when pushed too far. I wasn't going to just win. I was going to burn their petty empire to ground using nothing but paperwork and a $33,000 war chest I'd been saving for a kitchen remodel. The mailbox was only the beginning. The courtroom smelled like old carpet and cheap cologne, and I could already tell the judge was having a long morning. It was one of those quick civil hearings, the kind that roll through like a fast food line. I was seated on the left side in a blazer I hadn't worn since Jamie's cousin's wedding, and across the aisle was Linda Morse herself. Yes, the HOA president, seated stiffly next to a lawyer who looked like he'd rather be doing anything else. The nameplate in front of him read, Gerald T. Flannery, ESQ. He had a comb-over and a manila folder thick with documents he hadn't bothered to organize. The case was straightforward. The HOA was claiming I had knowingly violated the architectural standards of the community and refused to comply after multiple notices. They wanted restitution. $500 in supposed property value damage, nearly $1,200 in accrued fines, and in order for me to replace the mailbox at my expense within 7 days or face court-sanctioned penalties. I let them speak. I listened while Gerald Flannery read word for word from the HOA's community guidelines and passed around blurry, photocopied pictures of my mailbox taken from a distance, like they were evidence in a felony trial. Linda kept glancing at me, tight-lipped and smug, as if she'd already won. Then it was my turn. I calmly opened a leather binder and handed the judge 6 documents. The first was a side-by-side comparison of my mailbox and the one the HOA claimed was approved. The second was a list of 14 other homes in the community with non-conforming mailboxes, complete with photos and timestamps. The third was a letter from the original developer of the subdivision stating that mailbox design guidelines were subject to individual homeowner interpretation unless specifically barred by language in the CC and RS. The judge squinted, read quietly, then asked Flannery if the HOA had enforced mailbox compliance consistently across the neighborhood. Flannery stammered. Linda shifted in her seat. The judge turned to me and asked if I was willing to comply with design guidelines if they were shown to be actively and fairly enforced. I replied, "Absolutely, Your Honor. I just expect equal treatment under the covenants." He nodded, then looked back at Linda and said something I'll never forget. "You don't get to selectively enforce rules in a community. That's not how HOAs or the law work." He dismissed the HOA's claim for damages and fines in full. I'd won, but I wasn't done. Jamie was relieved. She wanted to move on. She even suggested I take the win, enjoy our summer, and let it go. But I couldn't, not after what I found while preparing for the hearing. See, during my research, I'd requested the HOA's public financial disclosures, which they're required to release annually. What I got was a PDF with line items that looked off. Vague expenses, reimbursements, board meals totaling nearly $3,000, landscaping charges that were double what neighboring communities paid for similar square footage. It didn't add up, so I dug deeper. Turns out the landscaping company contracted by the HOA was owned by Linda Morse's nephew. Not some major business either, just a newly registered LLC created 6 months before the contract was signed. The address listed? Her nephew's house. No website. No employees. Just him billing the HOA $4,000 per month for routine mowing and flower bed maintenance. Most of it was subcontracted out to teenagers from the high school for $12 an hour. I printed everything. I made spreadsheets. I connected the dots. And then I requested a full audit of HOA expenditures. Under South Carolina law, any homeowner can do so with 30 days' notice. The HOA board didn't respond, so I sent the request certified. This time I got an email back, not from Linda, but from their lawyer, a smug little note that read, "Your request for financial audit access has been denied due to harassment and bad faith. Please direct future inquiries through legal counsel." Now they were stonewalling. Bad move. At this point, I was $1,200 out in legal fees, document requests, and filing costs, but I was still well below my self-imposed $33,000 war chest. I called in a favor from an old colleague, a forensic accountant named Pete, who owed me for getting his daughter a summer internship years ago. Pete loved projects like this. 3 days later, he sent me an encrypted folder titled, "You're Gonna Want to Sit Down." Inside were PDFs, spreadsheets, flag line items, and a summary. Pete had tracked nearly $19,000 in suspicious payments from HOA dues over the past 2 years, catering invoices from non-existent restaurants, consulting fees to a firm that didn't exist, multiple office supply reimbursements from stores that no longer operated in the region. It was a paper trail of greed hidden beneath fake names, overbilled contracts, and lazy bookkeeping. And all of it pointed straight to Linda Morse and 2 other board members, Tom Kessler and Renee Draper. That's when I smiled, because now I had leverage. I didn't want just revenge anymore. I wanted exposure. I drafted a letter, not just any letter, but a formal legal complaint. I laid out the financial discrepancies, the lack of transparency, the attempted retaliation through lawsuits. I cited state HOA regulations and attached my documentation, complete with Pete's audit analysis. I printed 12 copies, each bound and tabbed. Then I mailed them, 1 to the HOA board, 1 to each of the 3 board members' homes, 1 to every homeowner in Crescent Glen, 1 to the South Carolina Department of Consumer Affairs, which oversees HOA compliance, and 1 to a local news reporter I knew from a community event last year. She had a particular interest in HOA abuse stories. Within 3 days, the neighborhood lit up. People started talking. There were Facebook posts, next-door threads, and whispers at the dog park. Homeowners who had blindly paid their dues for years were suddenly asking questions. Others came forward with stories of mysterious fines, unanswered emails, and denied requests that had never made sense, until now. And then something strange happened. Linda Morse vanished. Her house light stayed off. Her lavender windbreaker was missing from the usual morning walks. Her car, a beige Lexus SUV, Didn't move for a week. By the time the local paper published a front-page story titled, HOA under investigation for misuse of funds, she'd already lawyered up and gone silent. But I didn't stop there. I organized a special meeting, allowed under HOA bylaws if 25% of homeowners signed a petition. I got over 50%. At that meeting, held in the clubhouse on a humid Thursday evening, we held a vote to remove the existing board and appoint an interim oversight committee made up of homeowners with clean hands and no connection to Linda's cronies. The vote passed with an overwhelming majority. And just like that, Linda Morse and her little kingdom were overthrown. The new board immediately halted all automatic contract payments, called for an independent audit, and began refunding wrongful fines issued over the past 2 years. I didn't ask to be on the new board. I had no interest in running a neighborhood, but I was asked to serve as a financial oversight consultant for the remainder of the fiscal year. I agreed on one condition, that my original mailbox stay exactly where it was. A week later, someone left a bottle of bourbon on my porch with a note that said, "For the man who took down the Queen." Jamie laughed so hard she cried. We'd spent $6,400 by that point. Legal help, audit costs, printing, postage. But I still had over $26,000 left in the revenge budget. And believe me, I had plans. The mailbox war had become a full-scale battle. But the real war, that was just beginning. The thing about winning a battle is it gives you clarity. When the smoke clears, you finally see who stood with you and who didn't. And after the HOA board was ousted and Linda Morse disappeared into hiding behind beige curtains and legal counsel, I noticed something strange. The silence of certain neighbors. You'd think the whole community would be cheering. And many were. People left notes on my porch, gave me nods on the sidewalk, even offered free lawn care as a thank you. But there were others. Quiet types. Ones who didn't like that I rocked the boat, even if it was sinking. They preferred order, preferred control, and most importantly, they preferred someone else being in charge. Those were the neighbors I had to worry about now. But first, it was time to take a fight further. Not out of pettiness, but because something in me had shifted. I wasn't just a homeowner defending his property. I had become the line in the sand. And with $26,000 still sitting in my revenge fund, I had just a tool to make sure this kind of petty tyranny never infected another community the way it had infected ours. So I filed a civil complaint. Not against Linda Morse directly. Not yet. I filed it against the Crescent Glen Homeowners Association Incorporated for negligent governance, misappropriation of funds, and intentional infliction of emotional distress through malicious enforcement practices. I brought it through a personal attorney I hired out of Columbia. Her name was Nina Calderon, and she had a reputation for going after HOAs like a lion is cornering a lame gazelle. The case was more symbolic than anything. I wasn't hoping to get rich off it. I just wanted it on record. A warning shot. Something other communities could look up when searching HOA abuse cases. But while that was moving slowly through the legal system, I turned my attention to community reform, the part of revenge most people forget. Because sometimes the sweetest payback isn't slamming the door, it's rebuilding the house better, so they can't come back in. And that's exactly what I did. The new interim HOA board asked me to assist in rewriting the entire covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CC and RS. The same vague rules that Linda Morse had twisted into a weapon. I worked alongside 2 attorneys and 3 other residents who had backgrounds in policy, education, and construction. We went through every line, cutting the fat, clarifying vague language, and inserting strict rules for transparency, accountability, and most importantly, checks on enforcement power. Some of the new rules we implemented included mandatory HOA board term limits, no more lifetime reigns, quarterly financial disclosures posted online for all residents, a cap on fines, no more daily accumulations without court oversight, community voting required for enforcement actions exceeding $100, anonymous complaint tracking system, so no board member could retaliate or play favorites. We also abolished a single approved mailbox model and replaced it with a style guide, a reasonable range of options with visuals, colors, and flexibility that allowed homeowners to match their style without triggering a lawsuit. And just to twist the knife a little, I had my own mailbox, the one that started it all, photographed professionally, submitted to board, and selected as the cover image for the new guidelines. It was petty, it was poetic, and it was approved by majority vote. But here's where things got interesting. About 6 weeks after the audit and reforms went public, I received an envelope, thin, plain, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a subpoena. Linda Morse had lawyered up and was now suing me personally for defamation and intentional reputational harm. I laughed so hard, I nearly dropped the page into my morning coffee. She was claiming that my audit, public complaint, and community letter-writing campaign had permanently damaged her personal and professional reputation, caused her emotional anguish, and resulted in loss of consulting opportunities from other HOA boards. Yes, she apparently moonlighted as an HOA consultant. That lawsuit, it was a massive mistake on her part, because discovery goes both ways. Now, my attorney, Nina, had the legal right to subpoena Linda's bank records, her communications during her presidency, and even her personal correspondence with the landscaping company, aka her nephew. Within a month, we had even more dirt. Text messages where she openly mocked residents, referred to certain homeowners using insulting nicknames, and coordinated selective enforcement against people she didn't like, usually ones who skipped HOA meetings or spoke out against her. We filed a countersuit, malicious prosecution, and abuse of legal process. And since I was now acting in defense rather than as plaintiff, the burden of proof shifted squarely onto Linda. Meanwhile, Nina had an idea. She suggested we hold a community legal workshop, inviting other HOA-affected homeowners from nearby neighborhoods. We sent flyers, posted on local Facebook groups, and held the meeting in the local library's auditorium. Over 80 people showed up. The workshop turned into a mini town hall. People shared horror stories. One man was fined $300 for putting up a Christmas wreath before Thanksgiving. A woman was nearly evicted over a planter box her child made in school. The story of my mailbox made its way around that room like folklore. And when I dropped the line, $500 mailbox, $33,000 revenge, the room erupted in applause. A few weeks later, a journalist from a statewide news outlet showed up to interview me. Then the local ABC affiliate picked it up. Then it went viral on Reddit. I woke up one morning to find a YouTube video titled, HOA Nightmare Ends with Glorious Justice, with over 400,000 views, complete with animations, narration, and a dramatic reenactment of Linda staring at a mailbox like it had insulted her bloodline. Even a lawyer-themed TikTok creator duet the story and called it, quote, the most American petty revenge story ever told. I was invited to speak at a city council discussion on HOA overreach. I gave interviews. I did Q&As. I even got a call from a small publishing house asking if I'd write a guide for homeowners dealing with aggressive HOAs. Jamie said no, unless they paid me enough to cover her dream kitchen. We'll see. But here's the part Linda didn't see coming. Because of all the attention and the civil suits, the South Carolina Department of Consumer Affairs launched an official statewide review of HOA governance transparency. And guess who was called in to give a statement? Yours truly. I showed up in a blazer and jeans, handed over a flash drive with my entire documentation, mailbox letters, audit reports, court filings, and spent 90 minutes laying out the entire saga to 2 investigators and a policy analyst. That meeting turned into a formal report, which later contributed to the drafting of a new state bill proposing mandatory third-party audits for all HOAs managing more than 100 homes. A mailbox started this. A mailbox. And yet here we were, on the cusp of a legal reform movement. Now, let me be clear. I didn't do this alone. I had help. Neighbors stepped up. Attorneys offered discounted time. Journalists followed the scent. But it was the principle that lit the fire. I didn't just want revenge. I wanted to shatter the blueprint of abuse that HOAs like Crescent Glen had used for decades to bully homeowners into submission. Linda's lawsuit was eventually dropped. Her attorney withdrew after discovery, and the counterclaim spooked her. She quietly moved out 6 months later. The house sold below market. I heard she's living with a cousin 2 towns over. Meanwhile, Crescent Glen, it thrived. With the new board, dues were lowered, enforcement became respectful, and homeowner satisfaction shot up. The community newsletter now includes a Neighbor of the Month segment instead of passive-aggressive rule reminders. And the mailbox? Still standing. Polished every Sunday. Lit up at night with a solar-powered lantern. A monument to petty tyranny. And the $33,000 I spent to dismantle it. And I still hadn't touched the final $7,000 in the revenge fund. But I had an idea for it. I still remember the look on Greg's face when the process server handed him the letter. He thought it was just some HOA notice. But it wasn't. It was the official complaint from the county zoning board, initiated by me. See, while they had been busy nitpicking my mailbox, I had spent weeks poring over permits, drone footage, plat maps, and every square inch of zoning law. Turns out, the HOA board had authorized construction of a new ornamental stone sign at the front of the neighborhood. Only they didn't have the proper right-of-way for it. They'd built the massive structure, complete with lighting, benches, and decorative landscaping, 10 feet into county-owned land and 3 feet into the setback of a public utility corridor. It violated 4 county codes, 1 city ordinance, and 2 terms of the original HOA charter. They didn't own the land they built on, and they sure as hell didn't ask the power company before planting shrubs over their underground line. So I filed a formal complaint. But I didn't stop there. I hired a professional land surveyor, yes, another $2,200 out of my pocket, to precisely document every inch of the illegal construction. I created a color-coded 30-page report with pictures, diagrams, and legal notations. Then I mailed a bound copy to every HOA resident with a sticky note on top that simply said, "This is where your fees go." That sparked a wildfire I couldn't have started better if I tried. Next came the town hearing. The county zoning board summoned Greg and 2 other board members for a compliance review. I sat in the front row. When they tried to downplay the encroachment, the zoning officer held up my photos and said, "This didn't come from us. This came from a resident who did more research than your entire board." The board was ordered to remove the entire structure within 45 days or face fines up to $500 per day. The HOA had already spent over $12,000 building it. Residents were furious. I didn't even need to say a word. Meanwhile, I launched the second prong of my revenge, a special meeting. Under the HOA charter, any resident could request a vote to recall the board by gathering signatures from 25% of the neighborhood. I went door to door with my dog Lucy. Everyone knew about the mailbox drama by now. I didn't even need to explain. Just held up the letter from the lawsuit and the zoning report. Some people were hesitant, but most were livid. "Greg fined my daughter for chalk art on the sidewalk." One mom said, grabbing the pen, "Those people think they own this place." "I'm in," another man told me. I gathered 61 signatures. I needed 48. The special meeting was scheduled for the community clubhouse, which they also mismanaged, by the way. I had my wife help me set up a projector, snacks, and even coffee. I turned it into a full-on HOA truth night. The agenda? Illegal spending, petty enforcement, abusive fines, lawsuits against residents. I was nervous, not gonna lie. Public speaking wasn't my thing. But when I stepped up and started the slideshow, something strange happened. People clapped. They clapped before I even spoke. Then I walked them through the entire saga, from my mailbox to the illegal structure, the lawsuit, and the zoning violation. By the time I showed the invoice the HOA paid for a $7,000 fountain, while telling people they couldn't paint their fences, someone in the back yelled, "Vote them out!" We did, by a margin of 83%. The entire board was recalled. Greg, Janice, and Trevor were removed from their positions immediately. I didn't run to replace them. I didn't want to be them. But I did endorse a neighbor, Tina, a level-headed woman with a background in municipal planning, who had always tried to reason with them. She won by a landslide, but I wasn't finished, because I had one more card to play. Remember the lawyer they used to sue me? Mr. Franklin, the HOA's preferred attorney who issued all those threats? I dug into his firm's billing practices, and in the HOA's budget line items, I found something interesting. They'd used HOA funds, resident dues, to pay for the lawsuit against me. Problem was, HOA law prohibits using collective funds for personal vendettas. I filed a grievance with the state's Homeowners Association Oversight Division. I included receipts, the court docket, the checks written to Franklin's firm, and even email leaks from a board member who had secretly sent me screenshots. Apparently, not everyone on the board had agreed to the lawsuit. That investigation resulted in the HOA being forced to reimburse every resident for improper legal fees. Each homeowner received a check for $126.43. A small win individually, but symbolically, it was an atomic bomb. Greg moved out of the neighborhood 2 months later. His house sat unsold for a while, mostly because of the "Ask Me About Greg" sign someone put on a mailbox post. No one ever confessed, but I have my suspicions. The board was cleaned out. The community became calmer. My mailbox stayed up, planted in fresh concrete, and polished every week out of pure spite. My final act of revenge? I had the old mailbox turned into a garden ornament, planted upside down, surrounded by roses, with a little plaque that read, "In memory of Greg's control issues." Was it petty? Maybe. Was it worth it? Every single cent. The months that followed felt like the slow unrolling of a victorious symphony. Quiet first, then roaring with satisfaction. After the court delivered its final ruling and awarded me damages, the impact rippled through the neighborhood like a seismic shock. People who once waved awkwardly while secretly hoping I'd fold to the HOA now crossed the street to shake my hand. There was a collective exhale in the community, as if someone had finally stood up to the neighborhood bullies and lived to tell the tale. The HOA board, on the other hand, was in shambles. Nancy, who had spearheaded the lawsuit against me, tried to act like she still held authority. But that facade didn't last long. The legal defeat and the exposure of her misuse of HOA funds became too large of a shadow to hide under. Within a month of the ruling, an emergency vote was called to remove her from the board. Not only was the vote unanimous, but it was one of the best attended meetings in the HOA's history. Residents showed up, some still in work clothes, others dragging along their kids, just to cast their vote against her. I didn't even have to speak. Her reputation had self-destructed. What's more, the HOA was now liable for over $80,000 in damages, attorney's fees, and reimbursement to the insurance company for their failed legal assault. They were forced to issue a special assessment to cover the losses, and boy, did that go over like a lead balloon. I still remember the look on Nancy's face when she had to stand in front of the community and announce that every single household would be billed an additional $1,200 to cover the consequences of her personal vendetta. Some people booed. One man threw a crumpled soda can at her car later that evening. Others started showing up to meetings in droves, questioning every minor expense. She resigned 2 days later. And me? I kept my mailbox. Not just that, I upgraded it. I had a local blacksmith forge a custom, hand-carved steel mailbox in the shape of a knight's helmet. It stood proudly on a polished cedar post, engraved with the Latin phrase, Fiat Justitiarit Caelum. Let justice be done though the heavens fall. People stopped to take pictures of it. But the revenge didn't end with just the HOA's collapse. No, I had one more play left in me, one more nail in the coffin that, frankly, I felt they earned. With the help of a friend who worked in real estate law, I petitioned the city to de-annex our neighborhood from the HOA's legal jurisdiction. It was rare, but under certain local statutes, possible. And thanks to the board's recent disgrace and the precedent set in my case, the petition moved forward faster than anyone expected. In just under 5 months, the vote to dissolve the HOA entirely passed with a staggering 92% approval rate. The bylaws were dissolved, the governing documents revoked, and all enforcement powers stripped away. For the first time in over a decade, we were no longer under HOA control. The community was free. I remember stepping onto my lawn that evening as the news spread. Neighbors emerged from their homes like they'd just been let out of a prison yard. A few families gathered at the end of the street. Some uncorked champagne, and kids rode their scooters with no fear of being told they were violating noise ordinances. Nancy's house? It sat dark and lifeless. She put it up for sale within a week. Apparently, she couldn't bear to live in a place where she no longer held power. and where everyone remembered exactly who had caused them so much financial pain. But here's the twist no one saw coming. When her house hit the market, I contacted a friend of mine, a veteran contractor and real estate investor, and had him put in a full cash offer under an LLC. No red flags, no tricks, just business. The offer was accepted within 3 days. Nancy never realized I was behind it. Within 2 months, I had her house gutted, remodeled, and transformed into a short-term rental listed on multiple platforms. The irony? It became one of the most popular stays in our area, complete with a custom plaque at the front that read, "The Karen's Retreat." It was meant as a private joke between me and those who knew the story. Guests never questioned it, but my neighbors? They knew, and we all shared a private laugh every time we saw another family rolling in for the weekend. By the time a year had passed since that ridiculous lawsuit began, I had not only preserved my right to a decorative mailbox, I had removed the entire HOA, reclaimed control of our community, and even repurposed my former nemesis's home into passive income. People began calling me the Mailbox Avenger. I didn't hate it. There's a strange kind of peace that comes with justice, not just a courtroom kind, but the kind that seeps into your daily life, the kind that reminds you it's worth standing up, even when it's just over something as small as a mailbox. And maybe that's the real takeaway. They thought I was an easy target, someone they could push around for the sake of their precious regulations. They didn't expect me to fight back, and they certainly didn't expect me to win. But I did, because sometimes the principal is worth $33,000. And my new mailbox? It still stands tall. Still stainless steel. Still flawless. Only now it's not just a mailbox. It's a monument to resilience, to quiet revenge, to the man who spent $33,000 just to prove $500 wasn't the point.